for agreeing to talk to me. So did you said that like the email got sent to another coworker of yours?
Yeah, we actually, as a growing company, we've had people wearing all kinds of different hats, and so sometimes like emails to certain aliases go to people who like were doing this job, part time, and it's
Mhm.
no longer their responsibility to do, whatever. So marketing, especially, has kind of been handled by a lot of people wearing a lot of different hats, and this one got kind of lost.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think when I sent the email out, it went to like just a regular corporate general email. So I figured whoever's gonna get it is
Yeah,
gonna get it.
yeah,
We'll
yeah.
see. We'll see who bites. But no, thanks again for being here. I really appreciate it. And so, how long have you been at MindMed working for the company?
So I've actually been employed there since December, first week of December 2021, but I actually was a consultant, basically a PR consultant for them for the full year prior to that. So the company itself is only about 2 years old. So weirdly, like in the scheme of things, I think I'm employee number 89 is what it tells me in the HR software, but
Yeah,
I've been there for almost half the life cycle of the entire company, which is kind of funny.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
I came across MindMed when I was reading the Morning Brews
Hmm.
newsletter, and I think they were featured in an article of it. And prior to then, I was really interested about just I think I've coming across YouTube videos and articles about psychedelic assisted therapy. People coming across researches and studies saying that psychedelics, especially low doses of psychedelics, can help with chronic mental illnesses like depression, anxiety, PTSD, so on and so forth. So when I came across this newsletter featuring MindMed and the work they're doing related to these chronic illnesses, especially as a publicly traded company, I thought that was super cool. And I kind of want to just kind of like get to learn from you and kind of just be your student for a little bit about psychedelic assisted therapies, um, about what MindMed is doing in general, about what the services they're providing, and then what the future of this industry will look like. So I guess yeah. To sorry,
Yeah.
so
No,
to
yeah.
start off to
Def-
set the scene.
yeah, definitely
Yeah.
a broad starting point, and I think it's actually instructive. I can kind of work backward from
Okay.
Morning Brew, and that was a relationship I had developed with the reporters there from when MindMed. It wasn't technically an IPO last March, April timeframe. We were already publicly traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and so we did what's called an uplisting, where some of our shares were on the Canadian NEO Stock Exchange, some of our shares were traded over the counter, and we basically uplisted onto NASDAQ, which is functionally similar to an IPO, except that you're not raising money, you're basically just switching your shares to be publicly traded on an exchange. And so the reason, and at the time, the point being that at the time Morning Brew was interested, and they covered us, and they were talking about at that point in time there was kind of a boom in publicly listed psychedelics companies, the main other ones being Compass Pathways, which is originally a British firm, and then a Thai life sciences, which has kind of a German background, but now we're all traded on the NASDAQ exchange. But anyway, the point is what that kind of reveals about the nature of the industry is that actually these companies, including MindMed, were going public quite early in their life cycle relative to what a traditional IPO or public listing would be, especially when you think of the startup economy and you think of companies that raise, Series A, Series B, Series C, D, E, and like sometimes it's 7, 8 years before they go public. MindMed
Mhm.
was publicly traded uh, by the time we were a year old or something like that. And what that relates to some extent is obviously we had some very important early financial investors who believed in us and got us going while we were private, but ultimately the backing and the enthusiasm for this category of medicines is so grassroots and driven by the people who know how helpful and transformative these substances can be. And so basically getting on the public market is kind of a way to open up, uh, expand access to the stock itself, and to actually, cultivate the retail investor base that has been a driving force, not just for MindMed, but for the growth of the sector as a whole.
Yeah, no, I think, and especially seeing it as a publicly traded company, seeing it in newsletters like Morning Brew, kind of definitely give readers, the public, uh, the sense that these are not necessarily taboo topics as they were, not too long ago. Like these are breaking grounds in science.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions around what what it means that certain psychedelic substances are, you know, Schedule One substances in the U.S. or things like that, and people look at cannabis as being like a direct, uh, corollary, and it's completely like not the same at all, in the sense that by pursuing companies like MindMed, pursuing these as medicines, and ultimately like FDA approved treatments, which is what they will
Mhm.
be, it is not as relevant. Like basically, it's already the case that, the substance ketamine, under the, I think it's called Spravato, or S-ketamine, has already been approved and is being used in practice, like today, to treat
Mhm.
depression. And it has no bearing on whether, ketamine itself is not a legal substance, but the nature of FDA approval is sort of this parallel track that doesn't rely on, we don't have to convince Congress to like legalize this. You know what I mean? That's not ultimately what we're
Yeah.
trying to do. And I think it's important, for certainly for investors, but also for people who want to see these things come through as, medically prescribed treatments, that the path forward is not as murky as I think some people think it is.
Gotcha. So I kind of want to just start from the basics here. I mean, with all this groundbreaking work that MindMed is doing, could you just kind of explain to me, and to whoever's listening to this, what is psychedelic assisted therapy, and what's the gap that it's filling that traditional psychiatric medicine isn't?
Yeah, the core of it ultimately is that we have treatments available to people who are suffering from anything, as you mentioned, anything from generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, substance abuse disorders, any host of what we now just lump under the heading of mental health. We we have a lot of existing, frameworks and treatments for those struggles, and those treatments unfortunately range from, like, frankly, completely like misunderstood, or misunderstood's not the right word, but like SSRIs. If you look into, the category that of medicines called SSRIs that we most commonly use to treat, depression and things like that, when you actually dig into the body of research that exists, it's so like paper thin around actually understanding like why these things work. Do they work? Who do they work for? We know that they don't work for everyone, but we don't know why some people have treatment resistant depression where they've tried, two or more different substances and they haven't found that any of those work. And so the shortest answer is just that at a point where the existing treatment regime infrastructure is clearly not working for everyone, and frankly, it's not working for a very sizable number of people, there's always going to be a scientific curiosity to figure out, can we is there a better way to do this? And it just happens to be
Mhm.
the case that we're not just going out and picking up random medications off the ground and hoping that they work. We actually have this category of substances that we loosely call psychedelics, even though there's a ton of differentiation within. We have this category of medicine where there's an immense, backlog of data and research showing that they do work, dating back, 40, 50 years, when some of this research was being done, uh, before recreational use caused it to sort of be sidelined. um, So not only is there actually existing, academic and scientific research, but we also sort of have the immense body of like anecdotal evidence of people using these, and at the very least in terms of what the FDA cares about, safety and efficacy, you know we kind of have a handle on. No one overdoses on LSD. No one, you know we basically we have a starting point, a baseline starting point, to say that there's something here that's worth exploring. And obviously the scale of the challenge that we're solving for in terms of human suffering is such that it's worth taking a chance and drilling down here.
What kinds of, so I know you mentioned there's, I mean, a very small but growing body of research on psychedelic assisted therapies, but there are also anecdotal evidence of, these providing a lot of benefits to people that are struggling with these mental health issues. What kinds of insights have you seen, or has MindMed seen, but also like what are some of the benefits of psychedelic assisted therapy?
Yeah, I wouldn't be the best position to really go deep into that. I know there's a lot of resources. Michael Pollan is one of the most outspoken kind of champions on this, who can kind of speak more on the scientific side or the psychiatric side. I know the real thing to think about is how, again, under the seemingly monolithic umbrella of psychedelics, you already hinted at this a little bit. It's like what we're actually talking about here ranges not just in terms of what sort of disorders we're trying to solve for, but also in terms of the treatments themselves. They range
Yeah.
from, microdosing treatments that, we would call them subperceptual, in the sense that you're not tripping, yet they're not affecting you at the level of like you wouldn't even necessarily be conscious of what it's doing uh, to your brain, but there is still evidence that it is rewiring your brain over time in certain ways. So things ranging from 30-minute sessions where you are going into a trip, or microdosing sessions, or longer form like LSD tends to be like, all right, you're locked in for, likely, if you're not microdosing, then you're likely going to be locked in for an extended trip. And the nature of why someone and their physician and their psychiatrist or whatever, the reason why someone might pursue that approach would be very different than the reasons why someone might pursue, microdosing treatment or things like that.
Right. Yeah, you definitely touched on a lot of the things that MindMed is also just working on, especially, just to put it simply, but providing the benefits of psychedelics without the the mind altering effects of it, or the hallucinogenic effects of it. Could you kind of walk us through some of the portfolio of products and services that MindMed offers?
Yeah, so the biggest differentiator for MindMed, in especially if you're looking at the publicly traded psychedelic space, is our research around LSD. And you may have seen that, the headlines actually just after the Morning Brew interview, but we actually got FDA approval to um, go into our phase 2B study of LSD as a treatment for generalized anxiety disorder. So basically, what we would say is that it's the first U.S. commercial study of LSD in basically 40 years, since like the 1970s. So really, one of the areas we're most proud of is the research. And again, our research into LSD actually does split into the hallucinogenic or the perceptual level of dosing, and then also into the low dose, what people commonly call microdosing. And so ultimately, like I said, generalized anxiety disorder is the path that we're furthest along in terms of researching LSD as a treatment for that. Uh, we're looking at LSD with other indications ranging from like different types of pain, whether that's chronic pain, acute pain. Certainly, when you think about like the reason that the opioid crisis kind of kicked off was because we were looking, as a society, we were looking for ways to treat pain, and we thought that we had found some, miracle drug. And as is often the case, there's no such thing as a miracle drug, and there's downsides that come with it. So anyway, I mean, beyond the LSD portfolio, there's the other kind of proprietary substance that MindMed was actually sort of founded around is one called 18MC, which is a close cousin of a substance called ibogaine, which readers or listeners can look into more if they want. And ibogaine is kind of a treatment for, most commonly used as a treatment for opioid withdrawal or just general withdrawal symptoms. And there are a lot of kind of medical risks associated with using ibogaine, and the idea with 18MC is that it's a more stable substance that's been kind of artisanally designed to mitigate like a lot of the risks and the harms associated with ibogaine, while still having the same upside in terms of treating people with withdrawal. And so the last thing I'll say is like one of the areas that we have a few other areas that we're kind of exploring as well. But one of the biggest categories of psychedelics, which MindMed actually doesn't go into, but our competitors do, is called psilocybin rather. So Compass Pathways, most famously, is the company that's closest to uh, getting that substance. They talk about that as the substance. When we think of magic mushrooms, it's basically the substance that comes from quote unquote magic mushrooms, and that they're
Mhm.
pursuing that for treatment resistant depression. Um, and then the final, I guess, in terms of substances that people talk about a lot, like MDMA, we are doing a little bit of work with a close cousin of MDMA. It's a similar situation where we're sort of developing a proprietary format of MDMA that has its own properties that we think make it a better uh, long-term solution. But also, some of the most advanced work being done on MDA is by a nonprofit organization called MAPS, which is
Mhm.
for anyone who's familiar with this space, a guy named Rick Doblin he was one of the first people uh, going to Burning Man, raising funding from venture capitalists for psychedelics research. And so, MAPS is technically a non-for-profit, not-for-profit entity, but they're doing a lot of really interesting work, most notably with MDMA.
Gotcha. That's so interesting that there's a variety of organizations, nonprofits and for profits, delving into these, traditional plant-based medicines that were used so long
Yeah,
ago.
and obviously that's what makes this segment of the pharmaceutical industry a little bit weird and unique. And our CEO Rob Barrow actually joined MindMed from another nonprofit called the Usona Institute that's doing a lot of cool psychedelics work as well. Um, so there's a lot of considerations there. And you'll, if anyone goes and researches, Vice does a lot of good reporting about this. There's a big tension around the for-profit motive in this space, and similar to a lot of conversations around any pharmaceuticals, it's like, well, the generic form of the argument would be, well, the profit motive speeds up development, it expands, it makes sure that we get this produced at a scale that is going to reach the maximum number of people, XYZ, which is frankly reflected in the fact that, like, for 50 years this research had stalled. Like, basically the research started, in the 50s, 60s, 70s. It started with in the for-profit sector, and once the sort of profit motive was stripped away, the research kind of ground to a halt. But then the other reality is that, as you mentioned, these substances have a kind of unique relationship with, whether you want to say, native cultures, and that's not even just US, American centric, but like globally, it's kind of, there is a lot of sensitivity around, monetizing what some people would perceive as monetizing things that come from nature. um, and so that's something, just as the industry grows, that's just something that we continue to engage with and have to be sensitive about.
Yeah, no, especially with, back in the 50s, the 60s, the war on drugs kind of closed off that the research into those traditional medicines, those plant-based medicines, I would say. Um, but it looks like there is a merge between the Eastern cultures and the Western cultures, whereas like medicine is trying to attack all forms of medicine, not just, not just acute medicine, but it's holistic healing that we're looking forward to. I have,
Oh,
yeah,
no,
go
no,
ahead,
just
sorry.
going to agree. That was a good point. Yeah.
I had a quick question. So one thing that I really when I came across MindMed's offerings, and one thing that was really interesting was the concept of, guided trips. And I know Project Lucy is also a big feat that MindMed has accomplished. Could you just talk a little bit more about that and some of the insights that's been?
Yeah, again,
Yeah.
it unfortunately the science around it isn't really my biggest area of expertise. We will actually
Okay.
have Project Lucy is kind of the shorthand name that we had developed for what I was kind of talking about earlier, our LSD in the pursuit of addressing generalized anxiety disorder. And so again,
Mhm.
that would be uh, LSD administered at a dosage that induces trips, and obviously anything that is going to involve someone tripping is going to need to be conducted in a regulated kind of environment with whether it doesn't necessarily need to be a full psychiatrist, but someone who's trained in administering these treatments. And honestly, a big part of
Mhm.
what MindMed does and a big part of our ethos as a company is we don't believe that ultimately there's going to be like proprietary, like, what am I trying to say, like the clinics and the administration of these therapies are going to be are not necessarily going to be like brand name companies. So it's not like it's not like you're not going to have to go to a MindMed branded clinic to get MindMed branded treatments. Which, when you really think about it, is just as ridiculous as saying like if you wanted um, the Pfizer COVID vaccine, you would have to go. The idea that you'd have to go to a Pfizer store, like, that doesn't exist. That's not a like. So in psychedelics, there's a weird there's a weird thing where some companies are trying to patent and patent things around the administration of treatment, like patent different like office layouts and patent different like uh, you know formats for ways you sit in a chair or whatever when we're administering. And this is my long-winded way of saying that, like, ultimately, that, in our view, that's kind of a short-sighted approach to where this industry is going, because really where this industry is going to go is like we've funded a program at NYU, New York University, and it's going to be basically a training program to expand the number of physicians and nurses and things like that, expand the number of people who are trained to administer psychedelics, agnostic of, like, we're not making money off that. That's not like that's not a business decision for us. That's not like we're not investing in this so that it comes back to our bottom line. That's just a recognition that, like,
Mhm.
the infrastructure needs to exist, the treatment infrastructure needs to exist, and in reality that means whether it's MindMed drugs or whether that's Compass Pathways drugs or Atai's drugs, ultimately it's going to rely on physicians and medical professionals who are trained in doing this.
You're right. Yeah, especially as the space is growing, the infrastructure is key for physicians to have that space to really observe the effects of these drugs and seeing how it can help people and how it can impact their overall well being. Yeah, I have a so I guess like I have a couple more questions related to so one thing, so how can people start using this service? So I know that this is primarily, you're doing MindMed is doing clinical research studies, as well as products um, like Project Lucy and services uh, of that sort. But what like how do people kind of start using MindMed as a service, or what are some things that they should start to know before they invest in
Yeah,
MindMed?
so realistically, the nearest term ways that people are going to be kind of engaging with us as a company are as you said, the actual drug development clinical trials that we're running. And this website page doesn't exist yet, but in the next week or 2 weeks, we're actually going to have a website page on our site, mindmed.co, and it's going to centralize all of the ongoing. It'll basically tell you for any one of our trials, it'll tell you what phase we're in, whether we are recruiting people or whether recruitment has already closed or whether recruitment is upcoming. And it'll actually send you, you know, it'll give you the link where you can actually apply to be part of those trials. And that, often is based on geographically where you're located, or contingent on you having a medical diagnosis from a doctor. I mean, unfortunately, it is the case. A lot of people end up being kind of self-diagnosed, or frankly, can't even afford to go see a doctor to get a diagnosis. And that's certainly an ongoing struggle around this research as well. Um, those trials, by definition, tend to be quite specialized, or they start out at quite a small scale. There might only be 20 people, or like our biggest trial is 200 people spread out across 10 different sites. So it's 20 people, at 10 different sites. So again, when you think in the scheme of things, there's not a lot of people who are actually going to get to take part in that, unfortunately. But that is a resource that we will have. We always send people as well to, if you go to the website, clinicaltrials.gov is a US government-run website that, regardless, all of our trials are, you can find information on all of our trials there. You can find information on all the trials that our competitors are running. And then, frankly, you can search for trials based on what your diagnosis is, and it might not, whether it's psychedelics or not. You can go, if you have generalized anxiety disorder, you can go see what all the studies being run are. So that's the main thing in the near term. We also have a division of the company that's working on a division of MindMed that's working on what we traditionally call digital health, which is just basically ways in which people use apps or wearable technology like your Apple Watch or your Aura Ring, and how people use those to track their biometrics, or in the context of psychedelic therapy, researchers or clinicians can track how patients are handling a session, during a trip, figuring out where your heart rate is at, figuring out how your vitals are responding. So all that is to say that our digital health side is also going to be running some tests and studies that are much broader in scope, more like 1,000 to 5,000 or 10,000 people. And that's going to be around, testing different apps, testing, again, if you own an Apple Watch and you want to download the MindMed app or something like that, that'll also be kind of centralized through our website. People can find more information about that. Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Just a final question of, so clearly it seems like MindMed is having a lot going on with clinical research trials and the products and services that they're running. Where does MindMed see like the future of this industry in general? What are some challenges that kind of need to be overcome before it really sees growth?
Yeah, I mean, the surprising thing is actually how much we would say our challenges are not unique to our industry, or sorry, they're not unique to the psychedelics industry, in the sense that our challenges are fundraising and hiring the best and the brightest people, especially folks from other pharmaceutical companies. And my job and a lot of what we work on is positioning MindMed as a company that is working in the psychedelic space, but it is not a company that will exclusively be working on psychedelics, or only and forever be working on psychedelics. And frankly, we're not always looking to hire people whose uh, lifelong devotion is just in the psychedelic space purely. Um, and I think what our leadership talks about is ultimately, in 5 years, 10 years, becoming we would call it like a CNS powerhouse, a central nervous system. So when you think about brain health generally and everything that stems from your brain and your central nervous system, uh, there are so many tangents off of that, and corners of that, corners of the market that remain unexplored, and we certainly think that psychedelics and related substances are the the most high value opportunity to start building a company there, and ultimately we want to be known as the company that is going beyond psychedelics and treating brain health more broadly.
Wow. That's a very social, that's a very strong social impact and social goal. And I think with everything that's going on with the world, I mean, these stats are cited on your website as well, is, the rates of anxiety and different kinds of mental illnesses that are either going undiagnosed, or they're being diagnosed but they're being resistant to treatment. So I'm looking forward to MindMed, and all the growth that it's going to
Yeah,
see
I
in the future.
appreciate you having me on, and the enthusiasm. Like I said, we're lucky to be in a sector that is not short of enthusiastic supporters, and ultimately we just want to also make sure that everyone has a healthy understanding of the time horizons that we're looking at, and just the fact that, again, these aren't things that are going to be on the shelf tomorrow, but that shouldn't mitigate the importance of what we're working on here, and the importance of the goals that we're trying to achieve. It's just the the passion sort of needs to last and be durable, and not just ebb and flow. We're not talking like Robin Hood meme stocks. We're talking like long term medical solutions here. Yeah,
Yeah, right. I think it's a concept of going slow and
yeah,
starting low and
exactly.
going slow. Um, Appreciate it. I'm going to stop the recording, but I just want to just